The following is a presentation of Apologetics Press.
Suppose that you are walking down a beach, and there in the sand you look down and see a laptop computer. You pick up that laptop computer, you open it, you press the on button, it comes on, it works perfectly. It's the most advanced laptop computer you've ever seen. It's got a quad-core 6.8 gigahertz processing unit that has a video card that's got all kinds of memory, and you play a game on it, and the graphics are intense, they are 3D, they look real. This is the quickest, fastest, most technologically advanced computing system you've ever seen. And along the beach comes a man in a white lab coat. And he's got a PhD behind his name. And you say, "Sir, it's good to see you. I just have a quick question. I'm glad that you were here because I wanted to know if you know anything about this laptop computer." He says, "Well, thank you for asking. Just so happens that I have a terminal doctor's degree in laptop computer origination. Can I see the said specimen?" So you hand him the laptop computer. He looks at it and he says in a very intelligent, very smart sounding voice, "I can explain the origination of this particular computing system. Here's how it all began. Multiplied millions of years ago, on this very beach, lightning struck the sand and caused a plastic structure to form. Now, we've never been able to mimic this, and we don't know how it happened, but we know it must have because we have a laptop computer here. That plastic was washed out into the ocean. It was battered upon coral reefs until it was chipped into perfectly shaped key pieces. At the same time, metal ore from a nearby mountain had washed down the side of the mountain, gone into the same ocean, had fallen into a deep crevice and was pulled out into long wires by some chance random accident that we have no way of repeating and no way of knowing how it happened. That wire wrapped itself perfectly around the keys that were formed over multiplied millions of years. All at the same time, those wires came together. That wire key mixture was then washed into a bed of blue mussels. Those blue mussels put a special glue on the back of the plastic keys. At the same time, a school of squid swam by and sprayed ink on the keys, and the ink was actually white. Although we've never seen squid with white ink, that must be the case because the lettering on these keys is white. And that ink sprayed perfectly formed letters. And he continues for the next 20 minutes, telling you how this laptop came to be on this beach because of multiplied millions of years of processes that happened randomly and by chance with no intending designer. And you look at the gentleman, you say, "Thank you very much," and you look on the back of that computer and it says Dell. And you obviously know it had a designer. Folks, you well understand the principle. If you see anything that has design in nature, that demands that an intelligent designer had to be a part of the construction and the origination of whatever it is you see. William Paley is famous for making this argument. If you walk out into the woods and you pick up a watch, if you know that that watch works together perfectly, the gears, the hands, the cogs, everything is working together perfectly to tell time, then you know that watch had a watchmaker. Design has designer, a painting has a painter, a poem has a poet. That is a natural scientific law. When we look in nature, do we see design? Do we see things that prove that there had to be an intellect that was involved in the process of bringing the universe together? Absolutely. In fact, we see overwhelming evidence of design. If we were just to step back and look at the grand scheme of the universe, how the earth is in relation to the sun and the moon and different stars, we would see evident design. For instance, suppose that we were to look at the elliptical orbit of the earth around the sun. You may know that the earth goes around the sun about 365 1/4 days it takes to make one complete rotation. But you may not know that when it travels around the sun, it departs from a straight line only 1/9 of an inch every 18 miles. Well, you say, what's the big deal about that? Well, here's the big deal. If it departed 1/8 of an inch, then the earth would get so close to the sun that things would burn up and we would not be able to sustain life on this earth. You say, well, we don't want that to happen. No, we certainly don't. Did you know if it departed from 1/10 of an inch from a straight line every 18 miles, then it would get so far away that the earth would freeze and we would not be able to sustain life. You say, well, we don't want that to happen either. No, we certainly don't. And not only is the orbit perfect, but the distance from the sun is perfect. We are about 93 million miles away from the sun. If you change that by only about 10% and made us about 10% closer, everything would burn up and life would not be sustainable. If you say, well, we don't want that to happen, put us 10% further away from the sun, what happens? We freeze to death and life is still non-sustainable. Let me give you another example. The distance between the earth and the moon, that's about 240,000 miles. You say, well, what's so significant about the distance from the earth and the moon, 240,000 miles? You know, how important is the moon anyway? That's a good question. I would like to ask you to stop and take a deep breath. When you are taking that deep breath, you are breathing in oxygen. That oxygen is being captured by your red blood cells, the hemoglobin in those red blood cells. It is being transferred to your body so that your body can do the processes that need to be done so that you can sustain life. Suppose that when you breathed in that deep breath, there wasn't enough oxygen in that breath. Do you know what would cause a lack of oxygen? If you were standing on the beach and you were watching the ocean, you would understand that at different times of the day, the ocean is further out or closer to the beach. It comes farther up the beach than it does at other times because there is a tide. The tide is always ebbing and flowing, causing the ocean to move. Do you know what's responsible for the tide? The distance that the earth is from the moon, the gravitational pull from the moon causes the tide. Suppose you said, well, I think the moon's a little bit too close. I'd like to move it back just a tad. Well, if you do that, then tides are not going to move like they do, and the things in the ocean are going to stagnate. The ocean is going to stop moving, and the plants and organisms in that ocean are going to die. How important are the organisms and plants in the ocean? What's that going to do to you if they die? You might not know that 50% of all the oxygen that you breathe comes from microscopic organisms in the ocean. If that moon were further away, then those microscopic organisms would die and 50% of the oxygen that you breathe in would be lost. You say, well, we certainly don't want that to happen. Let's move the moon a little bit closer so we can keep all those organisms alive so we can continue to breathe. If you moved it just a little bit closer, the gravitational pull would be so great that 2 times a day, waves between 30 and 50 feet would cover the entire earth. Just so happens that it's the perfect distance from the earth. How did that happen? Whenever you see design in the universe, you know there has to be a designer. Let's look at the atmosphere of our earth. The atmosphere is composed of several different elements. One of the main elements is oxygen. Oxygen makes up about 21% of our atmosphere. When you breathe, that oxygen is what causes your life to stay in your body because those red blood cells, as we said, spread that oxygen out. What would happen if the level of oxygen in our atmosphere was increased. Suppose we said, well, we'd like not to have to take as many breaths. If you increase the level of oxygen, oxygen is a gas that helps combustion, which means it helps things to catch on fire. If you increased the level of oxygen in our atmosphere, guess what would happen? Our atmosphere would be so flammable that forest fires and fires would be much more common and we would burn up. You say, well, we don't want that to happen. Knock it down just a few percent and there's not enough oxygen for us when we breathe to sustain life. How do we explain that? Just lucky happening that there's exactly the right amount of oxygen in the atmosphere? Friends, how many times are you going to use that answer? It's just lucky that the Earth's the perfect distance from the sun. It's just lucky that the Earth's the perfect distance from the moon. It's just lucky that there's the perfect amount of oxygen in the atmosphere. It's just lucky that the Earth is perfectly tilted. It's just lucky. No. No, it has nothing to do with luck. It's all about design. There is design in the universe. But if we were to look closer, just move the microscope in a little bit and not look so far out into the space, to the atmosphere, but just look at a human body. There is so much design in a human body that our most brilliant scientists have not touched the hem of the garment of understanding it all. Let me show you how this works. Suppose you have a class full of 5th graders. And the teacher says, class, I'd like to introduce to you someone today. And the teacher opens the door and in walks who the teacher introduces as Chip. Chip is a robot. Chip walks with a robot's gait, very stiff and stilted and straight. He comes into the class and the teacher asks him several questions. Chip answers those questions and then the teacher explains about Chip. Explains that a group of scientists had been working for 10 years to design Chip. Chip can understand 3 or 4 different languages. Chip can make mathematical computations in a split second. Chip is a genius when it comes to robotics. But the teacher says it took them 10 years to bring Chip to us, and Chip obviously can't walk as well as a human. Chip obviously cannot get jokes like a human could get. Chip is a major advancement in science, but he can never and will never be able to do what the human can do. And then she introduces John. Class, I'd like to introduce to you John. John's a normal 5th grader. Nothing real special about John except that he's a human being. You know, if you cut John's arm, or John accidentally cuts his arm, in 2 weeks that's going to be healed up. The body is going to heal itself. If you cut Chip's arm, what's going to happen? That arm will stay cut. The wire or the metal will stay cut until somebody fixes it. John can get jokes. John can interact with people without having to have information pumped into him. John can originate thoughts. Now, if you ask, where did Chip come from? We all understand exactly where Chip came from. Chip was designed by intelligent humans. Where'd John come from? John, who is far superior in body and mind to Chip, where'd he come from? Oh, and the evolutionists would suggest to us he evolved over multiplied millions of years. That does not make sense. Do you know what the evolutionists say caused this design that we see in nature? They say that a big explosion known as the Big Bang caused all of the design and order that you see in the universe. Let's ask ourselves a very pertinent question. What happens when things explode? I think we all well understand the answer to that. When things explode, explosions don't cause order, they cause disorder. Suppose that you were going to try to make a laptop computer and you assembled all of the pieces, all of the keys, all of the wires, the motherboard, the LCD screen, everything that you needed, and you put it in a pile and you stuck a stick of dynamite under that pile of laptop computer parts and you lit that dynamite, you stepped back, covered your ears, and it exploded. When you get done with that, are you going to have a laptop computer? No. In fact, the parts that once were usable before the explosion are now going to be non-usable. If you wanted to clean your room, you wouldn't amass all the stuff that was causing your room to be dirty, your clothes, your computers, your cell phone, all of that stuff. You wouldn't put them in the middle of your room and stick a stick of dynamite under it and light it and hope that it would magically put all your clothes in their drawers or hang all your pants in your closet or put all your shoes on the floor in your closet. That doesn't happen, does it? No, it doesn't. Because explosions don't cause order. And yet we're led to believe that a huge explosion caused all of the order that we see in this universe, including the human body. That is absurd. If we were just to compare things in the human body to things that we know how to design, that laptop computer, for instance, did you know that if we wanted to design a computing system that equaled the human brain, it would take $100 billion, it would take a huge building, it would take the energy that it takes to operate an entire city. It would take our brightest minds to do everything they could to put the right information in, and then at the end of all that, culminating in the most advanced computing system that human beings can design, we would not have a machine that could invent a single thought. And yet the human brain does it all the time, processes information at over 275 miles an hour. Evolutionists themselves say that the human brain, that's about 3 pounds in an adult human, is the most complex group of matter in the entire universe. And we're expected to believe that that came about because of a great explosion? That does not make sense. There are other things in the human body that we can prove, have, and show exhibit design. In 1976, there was a debate in Denton, Texas, between a man named Thomas B. Warren and Antony Flew. Thomas B. Warren held a PhD from the Vanderbilt University in philosophy. He was a member of the Church of Christ. And he was debating Antony Flew, who at the time was the most respected, prestigious evolutionary philosopher in the world. The debate was around these statements. Thomas B. Warren said, "I know that God, the God of the Bible, exists." Antony Flew said, "I know that God, the God of the Bible, does not exist." When Thomas B. Warren was going to prove his point, Thomas B. Warren put up some overheads at the time in 1976. Now we would put up probably a PowerPoint slide, but he put up some overheads, and on that overhead he would put a prosthetic limb, an artificial hand. And he would ask Antony Flew, where did this prosthetic artificial hand come from? Was it designed? And Antony Flew would be overwhelmingly forced to say, yes, absolutely. It was designed. It was designed by our top scientist. It had a designer or multiple intelligent designers. I just read an article about a young girl who was given a bionic arm. This arm cost $4 million. It is the most advanced bionic prosthetic limb that has ever been put on a person to my knowledge. It was one of the most intricate, well put together bionic limbs that has ever been manufactured. The scientist who was talking about how this bionic arm was working said that they were able to take nerves out of this young lady, and they were able to connect them to 6 motors in this bionic arm that cost $4 million. He said that they were excited that she could pick up a can of spaghetti sauce and with her artificial prosthetic limb take a knife or a spoon and scoop the remainder spaghetti sauce out of that can. But he said, even though it is so advanced, costs $4 million, it's still very clumsy. Clumsy compared to what? clumsy compared to the human hand. Well, Thomas B. Warren said, Dr. Flew, did this prosthetic artificial hand have a designer? Dr. Flew said yes. Dr. Flew, did this human hand that is far more advanced than any prosthetic limb that science has ever given us. This prosthetic hand compared to this human hand is a pitiful replica of it. The human hand that if you cut it, it can rejuvenate itself. The human hand that if a bone breaks, then in that area the bone comes back stronger. The human hand that can go out and chop a tree down, that can hone the lumber of that tree into a violin, that can string that violin and then be genteel enough to play music on that violin and write it down on a piece of paper. Did that human hand have a designer? You know what Dr. Flew said? Nope. Well, Dr. Flew, if it didn't have a designer, how did it get there? You know what Dr. Flew said? It just grew there. It just grew there. The prosthetic hand had to have multiple, very intelligent designers, but the real hand just grew. Suppose that you were walking in the woods and you saw there on the woods floor a camera, a camcorder, a mini DV digital camcorder that would record pictures, that would take still photos, that would zoom in and that would zoom out, that could capture it on very, very close megapixels, etc. Would you ever think that that camcorder just grew on the forest floor? You certainly would not, would you? Did you know that that camcorder and every recording visual device practically in the world that you could ever go into Walmart or go into Best Buy and purchase, those video recording systems are all based on the human eye? That human eye that can regulate how much light goes into it, that human eye that can see so many things at once and send those images to the brain, that human eye that is connected to the brain by about 600,000 nerves, the human eye that in a day's course of activity does enough exercise so that if you wanted to exercise your legs that much, you would have to walk 50 miles a day. The human eye that moves about 100,000 times a day, that has about 137 rods and cones, 137 rods and cones that allow you to see black and white, and the 137 million rather, rods and cones. 130 million allow you to see black and white, 7 million allow you to see color. That human eye that is so advanced that we model all of our cameras after it, and yet the models of the cameras can't even come close to the ability of the human eye? How'd the eye get there? How'd the camera get there? Oh, the evolutionists would suggest, oh, the camera had a designer, but the human eye did not. I don't think so. In fact, I think you well understand what Paul said in Romans chapter 1, verse 20. He said, "For since the beginning of creation, the invisible attributes of God are clearly seen, being understood by the things which He made, so that they are without excuse." The hearing ear and the seeing eye, the Lord has made them both, the Proverbs writer said. Even Charles Darwin said, "I will admit to you that the eye with all its inimitable contrivances, that with all its complexity," he was saying, to think that the eye evolved over multiplied millions of years is absurd. But then he went on to try to explain how it did that. But he was right in his initial assessment. It is absurd to think that something as complex as the human eye could just evolve over multiplied millions of years through random chance processes. Something that was very interesting to me is in 2004, Antony Flew, who had that debate with Thomas B. Warren, he came forth at approximately the age of 80 years old. About 30 years, 28 or 30 years after that debate, he announced to the world, "I have looked at the universe long enough to understand that the complexity that we see in this universe had to have some type of designer. He says, well, I don't think it was the God of the Bible. I don't think it was the God that we read about, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. I'm not saying it was that God, but it had to be some type of intelligence that put this design together. Well, we'll get into proving that the God of the Bible exists, but I think that Dr. Flew proved to us that the force of the design argument is overwhelming. At 80 years old, he came forth and said, there's got to be design. You know what I, in my mind, like to think happened to Dr. Flew? I like to think that when Dr. Flew would get up in the morning and put toothpaste on his toothbrush and stand in front of that mirror and brush his teeth and see how his hand could unscrew the cap of that toothpaste, could put that toothpaste on that brush and then take that brush and gently brush his teeth. I like to think that throughout those 25 or 30 years, Dr. Flew in his mind heard the words of Thomas B. Warren. How did it get there? How did it get there? How did it get there? And when he looked into that mirror and saw his eye that was more complex than any video recording device, he heard Dr. Warren's voice. Well, how did it get there? Well, how did it get there? Well, how did it get there? There is abundant, convincing evidence that this universe, the human body, the human brain, the eye, the hand, exhibit design, and such complex design that our brilliant, most remarkable, gifted minds have yet to be able to fully understand and copy. It is a fact. When you see design, there was a designer. Which goes back to prove our initial statement that we made in Lesson 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I look forward to being with you, to studying more lessons about God, about God's Word, the Bible, and about proving that His Son is Jesus Christ. I hope that you will continue this study of Christian evidences with us. Thank you for being here.
This has been a presentation of Apologetics Press, an organization dedicated to the defense of New Testament Christianity. Visit us on the web at apologeticspress.org or call 800-234-8558.